Hi, everyone. Welcome to the finalist voting for the Maven Family Leave Challenge. Before I get started, I'd like to officially welcome Lauren to the panel. Lauren, we're psyched to have you here. So welcome aboard. And we are also psyched to have officially launched the official Maven Data Challenges page on our site as well. So from now on, all our challenges are going to run through here. It's where you'll have access to the current challenge, you'll have access to past challenge winners, and you'll be able to see all of the completed challenges from the past as well. So let's go ahead and jump right into the Maven Family Leave Challenge. And for this challenge, the objective was that you'll be working as a data visualization specialist at an online business journal, and your role is to create charts, visuals, and infographics as supporting content for articles. And as part of Women's History Month in March, in the United States, your company was writing a piece on parental leave policies across the business world, and they needed you to create an impactful visual using the data you collected. And that data was actually crowdsourced parental leave data from 1,601 companies across different industries across the world, including both paid and unpaid maternity and paternity leave weeks. So you can actually scroll through the nearly 200 submissions down here. We've already gone and done that, and we've actually narrowed that list down to 5 finalists plus 5 honorable mentions, which is actually where I'm going to start. So first up, we have Cameron Siemens with a really great entry for what was actually his first challenge. The main things that stood out to me here was his use of Python and the Google Maps API to add the base location for each company, his use of the median instead of the mean to remove the impact of outliers, like Netflix that has 552 weeks across the board, for example, and the overall just look and feel of his infographic that you can see here. So great job, Cameron. Next up, we also have Maria Jose Lara Ferez, and she had a really creative use of the project description in which she used this space to draft an email back to her boss within the context of the challenge prompt. And she actually had some really nice looking visuals here. Some of my favorites being this one that highlights the lack of data available, particularly for parental leave, as well as the differences in weeks of leave for both mothers and fathers. So another great entry there. Next up in our honorable mentions, we have Richard Melling, and he actually had one of my favorite project descriptions as well, in which he's kind of start things off by admitting that he started analyzing the data in detail at first until he realized that the challenge prompt was actually asking for something completely different this time around, which was just an impactful visual. I also like that he challenged himself by making his first kind of infographic and dipping his toe in kind of some design stuff. And I actually do think that the result that you can see here as well really works for what was the intention of this challenge. Now, Rishi Selva actually went one step further and created an entire article, not just the visual, but my favorite part was actually this visual right here. We see a lot of bad use cases for funnel charts out there, but for me, at least, I think this one really works, in which he shows the drop-off as he starts to add requirements to the parental leave policies for the companies in the data set. So that was really cool. And our last honorable mention is actually the winner of our last challenge, Stefano. And he actually worked with someone else, with Alexandra Sasek, who is an aspiring UX UI designer. And they built another article as well. And they actually built out an entire magazine almost, in which they also wrote the entire article, which with the supporting visuals, which you'll see in a second here in their Power BI report, some of which are actually really cool, like these stacked bar charts here. They're also kind of reminiscent of the graphics on the Financial Times. So those are the honorable mentions for the Maven Family Leave Challenge. Now let's dig into the 5 finalists. And Crispy, if you'd like to kick us off with Alexander's.
First up is Alexander Shestakov. There's a lot to like about Alexander's work here. I think he put a lot of creativity and curiosity into this project. First of all, we have a nice visually appealing sort of financial journal format. I'm not positive, but I think he might have mimicked Bloomberg Business Week which has very similar visual style and design of its page. And of course, I really do like this ticker. Really makes me feel like I'm looking at a business journal, which in his description, Oleksandr describes he is trying to write an article that's going to be dedicated towards managers and other business decision makers. And so, again, I love when folks include the perspective that they're trying to basically who they're trying to present to in their description, because that helps me understand exactly why each visual matters in their project submissions. Moving to the project submission itself, Oleksandr did a lot of really nice things. I'm going to pull up the image here. I think it'll be a little bit easier to see. One of the biggest things is that Oleksandr took a very kind of direct path through this analysis. And one of the things that he realized is that in order to tell the story he wanted to tell, he needed to seek some outside data sources. But one of the things that he quickly noticed was hospitals and clinics, which is one of the most female dominant industries, has some of the worst parental leave policies. But that wasn't enough to really tell any story. So what he did was seek external data and determine that hospitals and clinics also have some of the highest turnover among all industries. And this is a pretty big red flag when we compare this to other female dominated industries like education and finance. And so with all of those factors combined, Oleksandr makes a really strong case that hospitals and the medical field should really consider increasing its maternal leave to reduce that turnover. And of course, he's also careful to state that we can't solely pin this high turnover just on parental leave policies, but he goes on to detail a lot of the costs of turnover that kind of provide supporting data to this visual here, which indicates that hospitals have a 26% year-over-year turnover rate. So when we combine low leave with high turnover, we get this really compelling story along with costs. Say roughly the average hospital can save about $260,000 a year by reducing its turnover rate here. So lots of love here. I think he did a great job sourcing external data, and I think he used a crisp, clean visual style to tell this. So great job, Oleksandr.
So I am really excited to be able to talk about Gabriel Gravida's entry into this challenge. You might recognize his name. He was an honorable mention for our slopes challenge last month, and he is back again with a really great visualization. So I'm excited to kind of dive into it. To start off, the first thing I want to touch on is what he kind of wrote in his about section. He really did something that I thought was really smart and laid out exactly why he chose to focus only on maternity leave. And then on top of that, only on the 14 industries that he did focus on. He kind of explains in this about that he wanted to look at, the standards that should be granted. And to do that, he chose to look at the International Labor Organization as his reference. So from there, he kind of walked us through his thought process really clearly and discussed how he wanted to kind of focus on the industries that only met that standard. So we can kind of dive into his visualization. This one really stood out to me from the beginning. I looked at it and I thought that it was just a really clear, really crisp visual. There was a, lack of clutter. He really focused on what he thought was most important. And, I think maybe this is partially like the reader in me, but I really like how he laid it out. He kind of did where you can read from left to right, top to bottom, and get the whole picture. So, starting with a real brief title and then kind of explaining exactly why he focused where he did. This did saying that the ILO says that they recommend at least 14 weeks of maternity leave. So from there, the first chart that we kind of see is this nested or multi-layered donut chart. And it has those 14 industries that on average meet the recommended 14 weeks or more. I really like that he kind of called out the assumptions he used in this analysis, primarily that the total maternity leave was regardless of if it was paid, unpaid, or a combination of both. I wasn't sure originally exactly how I felt about the use of this particular chart. I wasn't sure if it was the most intuitive chart to be using, but I kind of think given the space constraints and looking into it a little bit more, it has kind of changed my mind. I think it's really easy to kind of interpret exactly what this chart is looking at. It kind of tells us very clearly, the top industry with the most time is consulting services, followed by consumer packaged goods. It's pretty simple to kind of look at. And it clearly shows us with this yellow line that, this is denoting exactly where those ILO standards would kind of cut off. I also, the horizontal bar chart right next to it, I think was a really great visualization as well. He took the same 14 industries. He's comparing paid and unpaid leave in those industries. And what I really like about this one is that he kind of called out that high level result of his analysis. And that's that the industries that meet the recommendations also provide more paid maternity leave than unpaid. And then finally, we have this matrix at the bottom. And this one kind of drills down a little bit more into the companies within those 14 industries, ranking them the top 5 companies in each industry. And again, kind of looking at the he calls out clearly again exactly what he's looking at, the average maternity leave. And that's, looking at total maternity leave and the highest paid maternity leave percentage. Calls out a couple of really great things, talking about, the companies that offer 52 weeks of paid maternity leave are highlighted, as are the ones that have fully 100% paid maternity. There are a couple of things that I kind of do think that could add to this a little bit. The resolution on this image, I'm not sure if that's really what's at fault here, but the resolution really made it hard for me to kind of see some of the numbers. If you kind of zoom in, there are numbers along the side of, this nested donut chart, for instance, but maybe it's also my eyes, but it is pretty difficult to read. And I would have loved to kind of have more context. So, if he had embedded a Power BI presentation, maybe like having a tooltip or something that gives us a little bit more context would have been great. There's a couple other things too. I think that I love the simplistic, minimalistic color design, but I do think that pink, especially when it kind of gets to be pretty small text, it can be challenging to read. So thinking about maybe like a darker background or a lighter text color would have made this a little bit more accessible. But overall, I really feel like this entry was really nicely organized. It eliminated a lot of the noise. I thought that the bar chart and the nested donut chart really kind of met that 10-second test criteria that we often talk about. And, I think maybe one of the most important things is that a lot of people that we saw used a lot of text within their visualizations this time around. And he really chose to focus on what the challenge objective was asking for, which was to create those charts, visuals, and infographics to support content for articles. So, I really enjoyed this entry, and I'm super happy that I was able to kind of dig into it in more detail.
Okay, so we have another very great entry here. I'm going to talk about Luca's entry for a couple of minutes. So if I had to describe Luca's entry with a phrase, it would probably be without a shadow of a doubt. It's really, really very crystal clear what he's trying to do. In his about section, we are presented with the context that he's focusing on, and the context is this. So the ILO, International Labor Organization, is recommending a minimum of 14 weeks for the mothers to rest, and the companies aren't really meeting this minimum. We have some other caveats here which describe some of the nuances of the data that are present, as well as some of the assumptions that he made while analyzing this data. Very short, very clear about the section, not too much, but does the job really well. So we're going to dig into his report, and right off the bat, we see this huge title, which I'm going to dare and say I liked better than anything else I've seen in the entire visual. So this is the huge, impactful title that says exactly what he's trying to convey. No nuance, no nothing. We just see that more than half of companies are not meeting the ILO standards. And that's a fact. It's a call. It's not clickbait. It's not anything. There's data to support it, and it's just awesome. I like the use of color. I like the chart, but I think it would work just as well even without the donut chart on the right hand side. Everything moving from here goes to break down and support this claim. And the structure is awesome too. If you see, on the left-hand side, we have these ILO standards, and the publications. For example, right here, we see the already mentioned context about 14 weeks being the minimum. And then on the right-hand side, we see that this is really not the case. Again, below, we have this ILO publication quote, which says the amount of maternity leave cash benefits should be adequate to keep the mother and her child healthy. And then on the right-hand side, we see that 77% of companies aren't meeting this standard. So if you take a closer look to the 77%, it's actually a little bit higher than the 71% we see in the subtitle. But the 71% is the total combined leave for the mothers, whereas this is only paid leave, meaning that the situation there is even worse. So what we have been seeing as relative numbers here, we see as an absolute values below. He isolates over 1,000 companies that don't meet the standard, and then provides us with an information about the average maternity leave in those companies, which is 8. So essentially, not only are they not meeting the standard, they're nowhere close. And finally, we have a breakdown per industry of those industries that have the highest percentage of companies that aren't meeting the ILO standards. So really, from top to bottom, there really isn't anything confusing here. He had a point, and he made that point crystal clear. I think that adds really a lot of value to the impactfulness that we were mentioning in our prompt. That being said, we did ask for an impactful visual. We saw that some folks went with creating the entire sort of articles, which is cool. This is, I would say, somewhere in between. It's not exactly an article. It's not just one visual that we can use. That said, it can easily be repurposed for any kind of publication. But as for the impactfulness of it, I would say he's spot on. So really, really, really strong work from Luca here.
So I'll be talking about the entry from Damon Woolsey. And before we get into the specifics of his actual final entry, I want to talk about his data cleaning and data validation process, because it's a really good example. I think anybody who wants to learn more about this process should check this out. So one of the things that Damon did is just quickly diving into everything and seeing how often data was missing on maternity leave here, that he saw that it was much more frequently missing on paternity leave. So calling those out. He also found some information. He did some great gut checks here that he thought just from critical thinking didn't make a lot of sense. Like, wow, Netflix has 52 weeks of paid maternity and 0 of maternity, which doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. And then the other gut check that I think was really interesting that he did here was finding 19 companies that said they had more paternity leave than maternity, which again, kind of a weird thing. So just in general, that's all the detail I'll go into here. But I think anybody who wants to learn about this, come check out Damon's project. It's a really good example. Also did a bunch of stuff to just kind of do more traditional cleanup of the data, like trimming it, looking for duplicates, looking for blanks, that type of stuff. But really good insights there that help shape the project. So I'll get into the actual entry now. This chart up at the top, he's looking at the recommended paid leaves versus the healing time that's required for different stages. And he actually went in and brought in some independent research. So very, very much fired up about this project, and brought in some extra data points, which I thought was pretty cool. So you can just see here the different recommendations in purple and how far they get someone into their actual recommended healing time postpartum, which was pretty cool. Next one here that was interesting is just how are companies stacking up, and looking at the percentage of companies that are meeting each of those postpartum recovery times. So we broke it down into less than 6 weeks, at least 6 weeks, at least 10 weeks, and then the full postpartum recovery of 26 weeks. So I thought this one was good. I will critique it a little bit. I think the thing that was interesting to me that sort of maybe took it a little bit longer time to process is, so the data points are mutually exclusive here. Everything should add up to 100, but the labels are not, they're not quite the same. So in this case, he's talking about it being at least 6 weeks, when in reality, it's not 28% of people that or companies that have at least 6 weeks. It's actually 81%. It's all three of these buckets. So I think that would be my minor critique here, is just labeling this a little bit differently. I would call this, between 6 and 10 weeks. And then I would call this one between 10 and 26, just so it's a little easier to process exactly what the chart is saying. But the general concept of this, I thought this was really good bucketing. And then he's got a couple of pieces here in talking about how important and impactful paternity leave can be. And I think this stat didn't come from the data set. This came from some of the independent research, but I think this was really interesting. And then contrasting that to how often employees were unaware of the paternity leave. So I think overall it was a pretty good entry. If I had to do a general critique, I think it was maybe a little shallower on the analysis than some of the other ones that we've seen. I think there was a lot of other stuff in there that wasn't really explored, like industry comparisons, paternity versus maternity comparisons, that type of stuff. So I think you could have gone a little bit deeper, Damon, but in general, absolutely loved the data cleaning and data validation process and how you walked us through that. That was great. And overall, I think this was still a really good entry. So great job on this.
All right. And for our last finalist here, you have Franciola. I have to say, this entry has really grown on me. I just can't stop thinking about this first part on the left that you can see here. And I think if we were looking for impactful visuals for a magazine article, which is the challenge prompt, and it just seems so hard to top for me. It just really strikes you, would you rather have employees with sleep deprivation and anxiety, or have an inclusive family-oriented policy? It's so good to me. I mean, the impact and shock factor is there, especially with these kind of anxiety-inducing questions that she lists here. The data is used in a subtle but really effective way. 77% of the 1,600 companies live up here, and just 5% of them live down here. And instead of using weeks, which was the granularity in the data, if you want to view it that way, she actually converted to trimesters, which is just so much better in the context that we're talking about, especially, if I close out of this, with what she's calling out here, and that the first trimester is the most challenging, as it's the adaptation phase, both for the newborn and for the parents. Now, I do have to say that the rest of the visuals in her entry aren't as good compared to this, and also I think compared to the rest of the finalists. But to be honest, if I was the magazine editor, I would maybe just get rid of this and keep this. And I think it's fair enough because it is also what she created for that purpose. I also wish, especially after coming from Damon, that we had a little bit more insight and background detail into her process in the About This Project section. But I don't know, overall, it just felt so memorable to me. So great work, Franciola. And that actually brings us to the end of our finalist lists. So now we just have the one, final challenging exercise of selecting the winner. And there's a lot of good stuff here. So does anyone feel that one kind of stands out a bit above the rest now that we've talked about all of them?
I have to say that Franciola's work makes a really good case. I actually kept it since really early on, and it was so great. And I decided to go the other way only at the last minute after realizing that some of the other folks had better visuals compared to what she had on her right-hand side. She does have a very distinctive style. She's a common participator in our challenges, and she's probably the person who, with the best usage of background images, probably the only one who uses them intentionally to make a point. I'm not sure, but it is a very striking entry. Definitely top 3 for me if we are doing the voting.
Yeah, I was just going to say, John sold me on Damon's a little bit, and I would maybe push back a little bit on the lack of depth. I think one of the great things about this challenge is, it's for a magazine article that may or may not have a specific angle. And so I think if we take that into mind, then I think the visuals that he provided are very impactful, even if it wasn't, a full granular analysis. And some of those inlays that he had with the images of the family just feel something that's so natural to see in a publication. So I really liked what he put together as well.
I kind of think that Bronislav sold me a little bit on Luca's with like just the really, the headline that kind of like just shouted out exactly what the purpose was, and then kind of all of the background and the supporting evidence. Again, kind of thinking about this as if it were like going to go into a magazine or something, I can see that being a really, really great addition to an article or a piece about, paid parental leave or unpaid parental leave or whatever. So I don't know, that one kind of sticks out to me a little bit.
Yeah, I wanted to defend it as well a little bit more, just because of how clear it is, and it's that it may not be that it covers all of the angles possible, but what he chose to focus on, he really did very, very good. So it's there isn't anything ambiguous there at all.
The two that I was debating between are already on the list of three, so I won't sway it any more than that.
All right, so I think then that leaves us with a vote between Franziolas, Damon's, and Lucas, if I'm not mistaken. Does
Correct.
Everyone have their pick? All right, so we'll do finger in front of the face for the blurred background. We'll do 1 for Franziola, 2 for Damon, and 3 for Luca. If everyone's ready. 1, 2, 3. Well, there we go. It looks like Luca takes it 3-2, overtaking Damon there. So let's give Luca a round of applause. Congratulations. So Luca, in case you don't know, as a prize, you'll be taking home a free annual membership to Maven for yourself, and then another one also for you to give away to anyone you'd like. So congratulations once again. And that's it for this challenge. So thanks to everyone that continues to participate. We've got a lot more in store for you guys, so stay tuned, and thank you.